Alright, I'm going to talk to you about newsstand variants and basically, what they're all about and what they are and stuff like that. So, if you look here, I have Star Wars 68. Alright, can you tell the difference in these two? They look the same, but if you look down closer, down here, you can see there's a Spider-Man logo, and then you got, kind of like a barcode. And the reason why the difference is the Spider-Man logo was like a direct. During the 70s and then 80s more so, and even now, direct meant that it went straight to the comic book shops. And the UPC code basically meant they went to grocery stores and stuff like that, so they could scan them or type in the number or whatever it was, so they can tally up how much it cost. So as time went on, more comic shops opened, and that's where kids got their comics, not at the grocery stores anymore. So basically, they became more rare as you get newer, right? Because let's face it, it's like, what are you buying a brand new comic book in, a grocery store? No, you're not. You're buying it at your comic shop, or you're getting it maybe mailed to you, or probably now digital. But back then, they were a lot more common to have newsstand. And so as time goes on, they get even less common. So for example, if you take this, Star Wars 42, first Yoda and Boba Fett, right? Got the two copies here. You got your newsstand, and then you got your UPC code. And if you look at like the price difference, right? So I have prices here. I'll show you what I'm looking at below. For something like, Star Wars, if you look at like, say, a newsstand, and around a 9.0, both recently sold for about the same price, $426. But if you look at, but there are differences, definitely. So if you look maybe at like the 8.0, one sold for $600 and one sold, the non-newsstand sold for $400. But they're not that wildly different. They're just slightly better. Right? Compare that to like something like an Ultimate Fallout, first Miles Morales. You got your 9.6 selling for about $560. You got a newsstand variant, $6,600. So it's a 10 times increase. The reason why that is no one buys them at the stores anymore. So back when, this Miles Morales first came out in 2011, they were so much more rare to have a newsstand. Like I've seen one, but I've never owned one. And in the newer stuff, it's interesting how they do it. They become, so here's a Star Wars Night of the Old Republic. And if you look at the two, you can't even, they both have codes, right? And it's really hard to see, but the difference is, I'll get real close, is one says Star Wars and one says direct sales. And the direct sales, comic shop, and then the Star Wars one is the newsstand. And the newer stuff, is super hard to come by. And they are just more and more rare. So the newer stuff, you're going to have a huge price difference. Like even, Spawn 1, 92 came out. You're looking at a newsstand of Spawn 1 for like $1,200 in a 9.8. But if you just got a normal 9.8, you're looking at $150. So the difference is, and also the higher grade you go. So it's easier to find a newsstand copy in a lower grade, because what do those people do? They bought them straight from the rack, and they're probably already damaged to begin with. So if you bought them straight from the rack or at a grocery store or something like that, they're probably maybe a 9.4 to start with. So the higher grade, the more rare it's going to be, as opposed to direct, goes straight to the comic book store. They know how to handle comics, so then they put it in bags and backboards, whatever they do, and it's in pristine condition. So it's been like, I even have like a variant of a variant of the newsstand edition. This one, the Star Wars one, doesn't even have, it has the logo for it, but then it has nothing in it. If you can see, there's, you know, here's the newsstand version. The direct version is just, it has nothing here. It's just blank. But this one has a blank space. So I haven't seen too many of those. I think it's just a random variant of a variant. But newsstand stuff has been coming increasingly more popular, and people are looking for it more. And I'm interested to see what happens in the future, because it's more of like within the last year that newsstands have been more expensive. So it'll be interesting to see where it's at in the coming years. I think one of the issues is like these, I have a ton of these, like these Turtles Adventures, you know, these are from the 80s. You can clearly see one has a code, one doesn't have a code, right? From the 80s, they're a lot more common. And so in the beginning, I saw a massive spike of getting newsstand. Oh, a newsstand. You know, people, it's like they just discovered it. And so they were paying outrageous more. But then all of a sudden they saw like, oh, since this is like a newer book from the 80s, there's a lot of them still. Now, if it's new, right? If you're looking at like in the 2000s, then they become super rare. But a newer book, just, you know, it's like in the 80s, whatever. I guess it depends on your age. But something in like the 80s, it's not as rare. Like the first book to go solely direct was this. It's kind of like a gimmick thing you can only get in comic shops. Dazzler, #1. No code, no nothing. You're never going to find one with a code or without a code. That's all you get is that one. That was their thing, was it's just direct only. And that's kind of like when they started realizing that comic shops are the way to go. But in the 80s, you got like kind of like probably like a 25% in grocery stores and other stores, and then 75% in comic shops. And then in the 90s, it just gets harder and harder to find newsstand. And then, you know, in the 2000s, it's very, very rare, like extremely rare. They only probably, you know, maybe 1 out of 1,000 or something like that is, you know, a newsstand variant. So those are more expensive, but the stuff in like the 80s, like you'll find that's like more and more start cropping up, and they're like, oh, okay, it's not as rare. So the prices are very similar, just slightly above. That's my dog. Slightly above, you know, the normal direct. So it'll be interesting to see. I'd like to see where it goes in the coming years. Frankie. Okay. Go lay down. So I'd like to see where it goes in the coming. So I'd like to see where it goes in like the coming years to see. I think as time goes on and people realize, okay, these books are really hard to find in a newsstand, and then these ones, not so much. I think the prices will adjust accordingly, because it's all supply and demand. It's all about how much there is out there and how many people want it. So I'll be interested to see where that one goes.